As covered in an earlier module, we understand that data and metadata are two related topics. Data is the things that we collect throughout our business activities that help us understand what our business does, why it's important, and how we can measure and improve on our activities over time. Metadata is all of the things that build context around this so we can understand it better. Because of this, we can think of data as all of the information we collect about when we run our business. This is our business applications. How do we interact with clients? How do we make sales? But it's also a lot of our back of house activities. What information do we collect when we run marketing activities? And this can include sentiment surveys. It can include interviews with clients. We have all of our information about information and purchasing, reams of data around how we bring things into our organization and how we sell them out to other people or provide services to others. We have massive amounts of data around our staff and our human resources. What are our people doing? Where are they? How do we pay them? This is all necessary information for us to operate as an organization. And then facilities management, what buildings do we have? What laptops do we have? What chairs do we have? Where are they? When are they approaching end of life? And how often can we replace them? All of this can be summed up as really, three different things. It's information about people, it's information about businesses, or it's information about events. What are the things that we do on a day-to-day basis in our organization? And, how do we track that and how do we improve that over time? Because of this, we have a very clear understanding of the value of our data. If you'd like to read more about this, there's a link down below to some information that I've published around this, and I'll be publishing a short video later in the year that dives more deeply into this. But ultimately, the value of data can be looked at from one of 5 particular lenses. What we can see is it's operational. Are we able to do our job? The value of data becomes, the ability for us to perform the role that we've been hired for. It can be regulatory. This is information that we collect from a tax perspective or from a legislation perspective. What is the information we have to collect for us to remain in business? This can include tax records, and it can also include information about people that need to be reported to government departments. Data can be strategic, and it can provide strategic value once we bring all of this together. When we join different operational data sets from a marketing and from a sales perspective, or from a sales and an invoicing perspective, we can start to see trends across different business units. Generally, this value is a little bit harder to define because it needs to be based on research, and it needs to be based on an understanding across business sections. And then lastly, some organizations treat data as a commercial activity. So when we treat data as a commercial asset, we sell it. There are lots of firms out there that provide data brokerage services or data upselling services where we can get access to important, sensitive commercial data for a cost. In those cases, we definitely know the value of data because we see it on the balance sheet. But ultimately, the value of data can be very clearly defined. It helps us run our business. It helps us do our business because regardless of how we do this, what we tend to see is people understand that data is something that we can use to better manage how we run our organization. The value of metadata, however, can be a little bit more difficult to define because it's a bit of a costed activity. Documentation is very hard to build incentives for because it's an activity that's kind of a nice to have. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at some really simple analogies we can use to understand why it's important to do this. To understand this, we're going to dive back into our book warehouse example. If I was running a bookstore, I'd be very interested in where all of my books were so that I could get them out to consumers and to customers easier. The ability for me to find and search through this data becomes driven by metadata. It becomes necessary for me to understand what all of the books I hold are. To do this, I'd effectively need an inventory of all the books that I have. In this example, you can see that I've got the title, the author, topics and categories and formats, and even shelf locations of where all of these books are. My ability to service customers is driven from my ability to quickly and efficiently find a book that they're looking for and deliver it to them. What I can effectively do is I can take all this information, and this becomes fed into that search engine we saw on the previous screen. The ability for a user to search through my bookstore to find information becomes really important because they can see what they can buy from me. The other important thing is that I may not expose all of that information. In this example, I haven't given them access to the shelf location because that's not necessary for them to know. But what I can say here is the ability for me to find a book title and search on book titles and authors gives me the ability to find the books that I'm interested in. And once I've made an order, the ability for the warehouse to quickly go find it and ship it out to someone becomes really valuable. Without this information, it'd be impossible to service that request, and I wouldn't be able to sell any books at all. So how does this translate when we start looking at our data warehouse example? Well, we've often seen data search catalogs where we can search through information to find data that's available across our organizations. Although many of you may never have seen a data catalog at all because of the effort that goes into creating and curating this. So let's understand from a similar perspective how this is valuable for finding and accessing data. My ability to find data in that warehouse is again driven by a bit of a data inventory, and we'll dive really deeply into one of the upcoming videos. But effectively, a data inventory is a quick way for me to see all of the data assets that exist across that data warehouse or across the entire organization. Once I've got something like this, my ability to find data, to be able to get value out of it, becomes accelerated. I can do more with it. I can search through this information. And just like with my book catalog, it doesn't expose everything to every user. In this example, we can see again, not all of those fields are available everywhere to everyone. So even though I might be able to search on the name or the owner of data, or I might be able to look for data of a particular type, it doesn't tell me the particular location because that might be sensitive. Metadata can have a lot of different lenses around who's available to access it and use it, as well as being able to provide a discovery mechanism. To understand what metadata is more deeply, it's now important for us to understand all the questions that it can answer. And the way that I like to think about this is in journalism, there's this concept of the 5 W's that help us understand, how to get to the bottom of a particular challenge or how to really dive deep into a particular question. And the 5 W's are who, what, why, when, where, and sometimes how. Being able to answer all of these questions helps us dive into a particular problem. It helps us, look at it from a number of facets to understand all the different things about data. Who's it relevant for? What's it used for? Why did we collect it? These kind of questions. And on the next slide, what we're going to do is look at all of these from a couple of different avenues to understand all of the questions we might want to ask about data to really be able to get value out of it. So what I've drawn up here is a little bit of a matrix that looks at 2 particular lenses. On the left, we've got our 5 W's, and across the top, we've got 3 different ways that metadata can support us. If you're interested, take a moment and pause the video and start to fill this out yourself. Start to ask this question. What are the ways that, what are the questions we might have about data that become really important for us to be able to use it effectively? How do we access it correctly? How do we find it? And how do we interpret it once we've found it become really, really important? Now, I'm going to assume you paused there and you tried this activity on your own. And what you're going to see is something very similar to what you've probably got in front of you on a little piece of paper. And if you haven't paused, do that now before I bring it up. So hopefully, after that second prompt, you did a little bit of an exercise. And what you would have noticed is that all of these questions would have come out. All of the questions that we have around how we use data become really important. Who can access data? Why was it collected is probably my favorite question. Why did we do this? Why did we collect this information? Why did we spend effort doing it? It tells us how we can use it in future and why it's necessary for us to manage. Where is this data shown? Where is this data stored? Who's approved to access it? How can I use it? Where is it now? Who's in this data set? Where was it collected? When was it collected? How was it collected? These are all the questions that we want to do to be able to interpret it correctly. And the reason that this is important is that there's been some ongoing research, and this is probably one of my favorite graphics around this, but there's a lot of ongoing research in how data scientists spend their day. And we see, more and more people are becoming involved in data. More people are using data to create dashboards, and they're creating toolkits, and they're creating graphics out of it. We're all becoming very data-driven individuals because there's so much data flowing out there. So we're all a little bit of a data scientist now. And what we see is the majority of people are spending their time on really low-value things. So what this research looked at was, it looked at, how were data scientists spending most of their time? What were they doing? And what they saw was that 20% of their time, so if you look at a 5-day working week from Monday to Friday, 1 day of their week was spent on high value activities. That's building training sets, that's building data sets, that's refining how they're using it, it's producing new analytics, it's understanding it at a deeper level. It's being able to take that raw data and transform it into something new. 80% of that time though, 4 days in a week, were actually spent on low value activities, just finding data or understanding data, going back and making mistakes. When we don't understand what data means, we don't understand where it is or how it can be used, it means we make the wrong inferences, we make the wrong information, we produce the wrong data, and that can lead to the wrong decisions down track. The fact that 60% of our time, so 3 days a week, is spent just trying to collect the data, means that we're spending more time actually trying to get access to and find data than we are actually trying to analyze it. And that's the importance of metadata. The importance of metadata really comes from our ability to actually find this information faster, and then make sure when we get access to it, we're not using it in incorrect ways. So if you're looking to save 4 days a week out of your time, or spend 5 times more effort on higher value activities, metadata is a really important way for you to do that. So the value of metadata comes from a couple of different lenses. It increases security because we know who's involved around it. We know who can use it. We know how it can be used. It reduces errors because we're not asking the wrong questions. We're not using data in incorrect ways because we know what it means. We know how it can be used. It improves our understanding of the final end product because we can look at the metadata and understand how we can use that to make decisions. It improves the accuracy of data because when we're using it, we know, when was it applicable? We know what time periods it covered. We know when it was collected, so we know that it's, up to date. And it reduces the difficulty when we try and find it. It means that, when somebody documents what their data is and where it is, it's easier for us to talk to the right person to get access to it. So for all of these reasons, metadata is really important to get value from data. It's really an enabler to unlock it. What we need is to make sure that everybody across the organization understands it. Everybody understands those 5 W's and understands why it's important for them to take a little bit of effort in documenting this information.